All right, so because I did a lot of stuff, I call myself polymorphic Ruby developer because I found myself in different roles, not exactly maybe I wanted, but I just fill up the empty space in different teams where I was. I'm the curator of Short Ruby newsletter. Spoiler, it's anything but short, if you see it, so it's very long newsletter, right? And because it seems like I'm good at emails, what you see today is part of a course that I'm building where you receive by email a piece of code and then I deep dive medium length into it, let's say. So today I'm going to talk in this talk about two main things. One, I'm going to try to pitch you in some way to adopt new features. I'm not going, my purpose is not to say this is good or this is bad, but more like just taste this and see how it is for you. Right? And then I pick up some of the things that were added to the language in the last 5-ish years since Ruby 2.7. I'm not saying these are the best ones, but these are, I found them the ones that are maybe changing the shape of the code, right? So how the code looks like. And so I was a silent user of the Ruby for many years. I think I started Ruby in 2006, 2007, something like this, and I was a silent consumer. But in the last 3-4 years, I wanted to get involved in the Ruby, right? And I have two main concerns. One is about how to grow the Ruby community. I'm not a Ruby core committer, so my purpose is like, I'm a user, how can I do something and make it better or bigger or, I don't know, contribute in some ways. And another one is how to keep Ruby relevant for the next 30 years because I love Ruby and I will see myself using it for many years, hopefully, right? And I love Ruby in two ways. I come to Ruby with a background from Java and I was writing some Python for some backend servers and some PHP on the side, 2006, and I was doing UI interfaces with something like Scriptaculos or prototype.js, and there was some other stuff back then, right? Pre-jQuery for the young people here. And I found first Ruby to be like freedom. Like I felt those languages are having a lot of constraints, and while writing Ruby, I felt like, oh my God, this is freedom to write how I want it, in a way, right? And also Ruby for me, it's about creativity because I feel like I can create something by putting my thoughts into code, right? In some ways, and also because in Ruby we're talking about beautiful codes, and beautiful is very close in an embedding maybe to art-like things, right? And art is very close in an embedding to creativity, in my mind, right? So this is how I see Ruby. So talking a bit about Ruby, it seems old, right? 31 years old, thank you for that. I did not remember the exact age, but Bug told us, 31 years. So it seems like it's a kind of mature language, and I wanted to explore a bit some kind of evolution of how we do stuff in some languages. Now, I don't plan to do a historical lesson, but just let's take a simple problem, like how to calculate the sum of elements of an integer array, right? So maybe in assembly, we can do it like this. I did not write this code. I search on Google. Then I asked ChatGPT to explain it. It seems like, okay, seems like to work, right? It has a jump. It has some I remember some registers. So this is assembly to me, right? So this was doing a loop. And maybe it was better than doing it manually or with punch cards, right? But if you look at it, one thing about this code that I will say is that it's very detailed and very explicit, right? Like very detailed and very explicit. And maybe we got a bit better, right? So we were writing C, which seems to be more English-like, right? Still very detailed and very explicit. And just focus on the essential here. Like you wanted to loop through something, so you had to decide, I want an iterator, let's call it Y, and it starts with 0 or 1. Okay, in C it starts with 0 and the size, and you have a condition for stopping the loop, and this kind of decision that you had to take. Right, and then have the main thing, sum, right? An accumulator, you're putting the sum there and doing stuff, right? And then someone, in this case Mats, was thinking, oh, what if I can compress that into a word called each? And this is actually a screenshot of the each definition in the Ruby language, right? And so we can write something like this now in Ruby, right? So if you look at this one, what is happening is that I'm not concerned with what's the name of the iterator, where does it start, where does it stop, nothing about this. I'm focusing on the essential. I want a sum, and this is what I write there, right? So it's a compression thing. Even more so, Ruby comes with beautiful, but also aliases things, right? So I can do a sum just writing sum, so that's a beautiful compression. I don't even have to think about the name of the accumulator inside it, right? And more so, if you think about map, what this brings us, right, is like by using these concepts that are compressing some algorithms into simpler concepts, I can tackle more complex algorithms. Now, this is not exactly lead code complex, but just doing the sum of some subarrays, right? I can write it this way or the other way, right? And for me, Ruby, if you think about it, is doing this kind of compression, let's call it. But maybe, okay, in programming we call it abstraction, right? We abstract some things, and this is good that we abstract some things because this makes us write code that we call concise code, okay? Brevity, I know, right? Concise code. So and that allows us to go from solving simple problems, how to loop through an array, to solve more complex business logic. Imagine, I don't know, you're doing some authentication in Rails, and you write it in assembly, the kind of business logic. So you're concerned with a lot of details that does not matter for that business logic, right? And this in the end, for me, it's a road to simplicity. Although Ruby has a lot of standard and core library, I can pick and choose them, and I can write it simple, right? But because Ruby is a mature language, the mature languages have a dilemma. And the dilemma is that the mature language needs to change to remain relevant, right? It needs to address new problems, and it needs to increase usability. And that we put it in balance, that adding new features or making big changes can disrupt existing code bases. So if you remember in startups, there is this innovator dilemma. Let's make this programming languages dilemma, right? About users. So long-time users will want stability and backward compatibility, while new users, or those facing the pain at the edge of what's now, at the present, right? They are in favor of more disruptive changes, right? So for me, thinking about keeping Ruby relevant, right? It's about thinking where I am with this. And here is what is happening, I think, maybe. If you are learning Ruby today, right? You look at the features that it has, and all of them are maybe exciting for you. It does not matter if they were added 20 years ago or last year, okay? Everything is new and exciting. But if you are using Ruby for a while, for a period, that's a bit of the problem of the expert, that your mind is so shaped into and so fit to using what's there and what was there when you started learning, right? And when I say your mind, it's true that the language influences the way you see your world. You see the solutions in those terms, in those words, in those contents, right? That you start to become, maybe I start to become, let's talk about me, right? We tend to start to become conservative. And that's not bad, right? Saying, okay, I want to protect here. But there is a risk to this, right? The risk is when this is going to some defaults, like being against what's new, right? And being against what's new brings us to I'm not even trying it. Okay, I'm not even trying it. Or trying to use all solutions for new problems, and this creates a problem that we're changing the problem to fit the solution. Right? So we're not solving the exact problem. We say, oh, let's solve something else because this is what I know, right? And the problem with conservative also about the community, because I wrote there about community, is that being conservative in this way, you become rigid, right? You become stiff and inelastic, right? And that is a bit stuck in the past, right? And that means that you're getting close. You don't want to see something different there, right? And what is happening is actually by trying to protect so much what we have, right? We don't see that we are actually shielding it from the future and destroying it in this process. So by wanting Ruby to stay the same as it was 10 years, 15 years ago, we're actually keeping Ruby in the past, right? And so not fit for the future. So it's good to be open to new. And what does it mean to me? It means to experiment, to choose what it works for you. I'm not saying adopt blindly everything, right? And to be open that, okay, when you're doing something new, you are open to breaking and rebuilding, to refactoring stuff, Okay? And that is for me the path to being relevant. So I'm coming back to the question that I asked, like how can I keep Ruby relevant from the place where I am? And my solution, of course, is adopt new features, experiment with them, see what works, it does not work, and bring feedback to Ruby committers, Rails committers about this, right? And one asterisk here, adopt new features means try to use them in a production-like environment, right? Not just, okay, I'm firing up IRB, I write something there, I don't like it because it's not good, right? Try to fit it in a real environment and bring feedback about that. Okay, so I'm going to show you some code that I know that some people don't like it in some ways, right? They find it weird. So I'm trying to show to you some examples of this code and push it in GitHub. So this endless method was added in Ruby in the 3.0 in 2020. This is not chronological. I just put them in order to arrive to pattern matching. Okay, in some order. So how does it look? It's like you have the def keyword and then the name, and it might be some parameters and the equal sign and then the body. Here it's one line, but endless method is not about being one line. I will show you some examples before, right? So you might find this weird, and I was reading the feature discussion, and people were saying, this is confusing for me. Is this a variable or not? And for me, it's not confusing. There is a def before, and then there is a equal there, right? So I read this very beautifully, like define exists as equal to that active record expression, right? But we had one-liners before, even before this definition. Like this is a valid Ruby one line, and this is another one, and I let some empty space there for a purpose that I will show you, and then another one. And you saw some other one-liners, very nicer from back today. But so here's my question. Does that end bring any valuable for you when you're reading this code? Do you feel the need to have an end to know that the body is finishing there? And my assertion is you don't need it, right? So if I'm trying to blur it out more and more, right? I think for the first line, are you confused that when the curly bracket is ending, is that ending? No. The second line, I assert there is a space there, but I don't assert that you expect that the body will continue, right? Maybe the third one, now blurring out the end, it's a bit confusing. So this is why I think it's good that we have the endless method, right? So the endless method comes and says, this is the method definition, equal, and this is the body, right? This is the transformation that I see. And let me give you some kind of examples of what I will transform. So I was doing some review of some open source code for a series on my blog, and I noticed in Mastodon this thing, let me zoom in a bit, where they have a nice developer experience that they define some kind of response with some nice labels, right? And they look quite the same. And I was thinking, what if I put endless method here, right? Like, I think that's not confusing. And if I put it, I can organize it like this. And I know when you read it, you might feel weird. Oh my God, so spaces, and it's aligned by equal, and I don't know. It even has comments in the code, right? But I'm saying that putting it like this, for me, it brings a nice benefit that I can read it all in a very few lines. I understand about what it is, and they are grouped together by their purpose, right? This is their purpose here. So I can group them if I want. Again, I'm not saying you should do it like this. I'm just showing you some possibilities, right? I'm not judging good or bad, okay? So why use the endless method? So yeah, you can write small utility methods with it, right? Like this. You can write small utilities. This is, because with Short Ruby, I'm watching various social media platforms. This is an actual code from something that I'm using to query different things. So you can do the following. You can write small utility methods and make it hard to make them complex. You see already this code is a bit complex, right? Putting it one line means that if I want to add something more, some other chain, I will need probably to refactor it, right? It becomes too long to parse it. So in this instance, being one line makes it harder to make it complex. And I find that a feature, okay? And of course, because in a way, if you're not in a high performance environment, method free in some way, right? I'm not saying they are memory free or performance free, but if you're not in high performance, you can create quite some methods until you reach a performance barrier. So you can use it for naming. So let's say you have this type of code where you have some user settings and some teams preferences and then some default ones, right? So you're writing somewhere this, but I can easily, without adding too many lines of code, so the same number of lines of code, I can label them with endless methods, right? And then this will bring me to do some nice composition, right? So I can write user settings, it's that or the other, and so on, right? Just presenting some code. And you can define predicates, right? You could not need to define them. You can say not confirmed at nil and keep using it in the code, but you can define some nice predicates, simple ones with them, because naming is important, right? And yeah, these new things, I will not go into all of them because I want to show you some code, but they have some gotchas. They are new in some ways. Like for example, the endless method does not support defining a setter, right? Not sure if this is a technical thing or it is because people are saying too many equals in that definition there, right? It might get weird a bit, right? But it does not support now, I'm not sure, but just saying. Yeah, it has some others maybe, right? But I can push you a bit further. So see, endless is not one line method, right? It's one instruction or one statement. So you can write code like this if you want. This is changing a bit the shape of the code, right? Or you can even write with a case here. And I will show you some cases with pattern matching even, right? So still an endless method, but I made it a multi-line method. Okay. Again, not saying write this or not write this, but I'm saying let me show you some interesting code. Right? Another feature, data class. This was added in Ruby 3.2, 2022, and I'm very enthusiastic about this, although maybe it does not change the shape of the code, but I found it very useful. So what is data class? They say it's a convenient way to define simple classes for value-alike objects. So it's like a simpler struct, if you're using struct, that has some properties that you can maybe achieve with struct, but this has them by default. It's immutable, it has a simple interface, and it's comparable by value and by type. And it has some things for pattern matching, you will see. And it has a very simple interface. These are the only methods here for this data class, right? And let's look a bit about it with an example. So let's say I have a link, and this is how you define it, data define. And we can discuss in the break why there is data define and not data.new. But this is how you write it. And you can instantiate it like this with keyword arguments. You can instantiate it like this with positional arguments, but you can also instantiate it with this construct, alternative form construct, that we also saw from back presentation at some point, and also with this construct with hash-like arguments, right? And then coming back to immutability, it has no setters. So this is when you're instantiating, you're providing the value for the keyword that you're or instance variables from there, but you cannot change them. It will throw a frozen, no method or error. You cannot even change your own custom instance variable. So let's say you don't plan to change your error title, but you made it inside to change an instance variable that you're defining, and it will show you a frozen error. You cannot change that, right? And that is because it's frozen, right? When it's frozen. Now, just an asterisk, this is frozen the same way that you can freeze a data structure, but if you put a hash in it and change the value inside of a hash, you can do it. Right? But I will not go into this. Maybe this is weird things number 2. Okay? But it's frozen. So why use it? So it's the first thing is like you want to keep data together. Unchangeable data, right? So let's see an example, a real one, right? You're consuming an API and you want to move in your code to send what you read from there further on to be processed. So you can define a response like that and then instantiate it and passing along. You can maybe work in a booking system where you have events and you are already setting up some day, start time, end time, and you want to pass it along, right? And you might wonder 2 things. I explained why not struct. You can do the same with struct, but you have to provide some arguments and so on. Why not hash, right? You might ask, oh, wait a second, why do I need that? I have hashes. Right? And I will not go into all details why not, but just sharing you about the shape of the code. So here are some examples about hash. One, hash is like an anonymous structure, right? So can you grab all the cases in your code where you have this structure? Hard, right? But you can grab response if you want. With LSPs, you can go to source, right? Very quickly, or go to where useful instances, right? But more so, you can add computed attributes on the data define, right? Simple attributes. Okay, I made it endless, but you don't have to make it endless, right? So simple. You can make it like this, which you cannot do in hash. You can even use them in nested, right? So here I'm using rate limit, and I'm putting it there. I'm instantiating it, and I don't need to change this because I just read them, right? And yeah, another example of a computed attribute, and it removes boilerplate code. And usually I could have achieved the same by doing this simple plain or Ruby object, right? But this is just replaced with this. It even supports inheritance if you like. You can make it like this, right? And here is a real example from the Odin project that I found. And they define here a data object. And then they have a list of reasons that they are objects, right? Because they have some attributes. And then they hook it up to Rails enum here, right? And then they can use it in the view like this. And of course, you can do the same with hash. But this brings you a nice object-oriented organization, right? You have that object, you know how it is. If you have to change it, you have a way to know where to change it. Another one, and this one, it's I think maybe the most controversial one because we are even debating sometimes now the change between hash with hash rocket keys and the simplified one. I don't remember the name, right? So we added something more, but let me go a bit to it, right? This was added in Ruby 3.1, 2021. So how it goes? Let's say we have this small code that someone wrote. It named differently for some reason. So let me just rename it a bit to have good names, right? To use the same concept, URL, not website, and so on, right? A bit of renaming. So now it looks like this, right? So then here's my assertion here. Do I maybe need these things here, right? This seems like repetition in a way. And that is the pitch for this hash rocket, right? So because if I'm writing it like this is hash value and literal omission, it works. What it does, you put a key and it searches for a local variable or in your scope with the same name and use it as a value, right? And I know might seem weird, but as you're starting to reading it, you become accustomed with it. Now let's take a more complex example. Let's say we have a link and a null object of that link with data defined and I don't know, some kind of validator for the URL. And let's say somewhere in the code, this is part of a class, let's say, but I did not put everything here. You're doing something like save link with some intermediate steps, but I made it simpler a bit here, right? So again, maybe this is written in different parts of the code in the same file, but using different names. Always naming it should be for me standard or consistent, right? So let's look at it. It's website URL, and even address, right? And for me, thinking about hash literal value means I want to bring them together. So I just rename them to mean the same way, to be the same naming. So now what I can do is I can get rid of these extra things here, right? So now this code, right, the value on top flows through it, and I can only focus on the top part of it. And I know if I change that, everything follows. It's just an example. Okay, about this. So why use it? I think from my pitch, this is simple. I don't have more examples. If you want to use it, it's mostly simplifying names and reducing repetition, right? So it's about being concise and being consistent in the naming. It forces you to use the same name for the value as the key, right? That's the main thing. Or else it does not work, right? And now I'm just introducing a smaller one, argument forwarding. This is in Ruby since 2.7, 2019. And what's its argument for forwarding? I have the same source, but if I do a change here and I put these 3 dots, I want to say that everything that comes after URL will be passed on to the link thing, everything. So what does mean? That means if I want to do a change, let's say someone says, we're reading a list of blogs, so we want to have the author there, right? I only have to change the call to that method, but the body remains the same. And it's fine for the body to remain the same because the body has the same purpose, instantiating and validating the URL. It's not concerned with the other things there, right? Yeah. And it brings me to actually the thing that I think has the possibility to change the shape of the code or the code design that we are using. And here I will just show you some examples, but this concept is more complex than what I will show you. More complex in the sense that you can do more with it, right? But let's take it again with an example. You have to parse or ingest some kind of JSON that looks like this, and you only have this type for now. That's the request. You have a push notification, you have to do something with it. So, of course, I'm making a structure, a data defined, and then what I can do, so because the type is push, okay, I don't know what other types are, but I want to make sure that I'm only processing this type that I'm sure of, right? So I can write this code which is pattern matching, and I can say, if the JSON that you're providing me has the following structure, type, push, and then some other attributes that I'm concerned with the value, I can instantiate what new. And then you might say, hey, but where the title, body, and push time are coming in that thing there? I did not define those there. So let's try to debug it a bit, right? So let's try to print local variables here. What do you think will the line 9 will print? What local variable names we have there? Notification, right? That's the only local variable. This 7, it's a constant. Okay, it's not a local variable. Okay, and what do you think the line 13 will print? Exactly, exactly. Yeah, you got it already. I can stop with this. Yes. So it creates local variables. Now, just a bit of so there is that and there is this, right? So a small warning here. Right? It creates local variables. If they exist, it will change their values. You can force it not to change it by using this pinning operator. I will not show too many examples of this, but there is a way to not change it if you want to, right? Okay, so let's make this a bit more. Oh, I'm in OP in Ruby. I want to create some methods, and I want to create a build-like method, preparing for maybe different types, right? So I'm putting it like this. And okay, this is simple. So this is a way to write it with in. And if you do if something in something else, that in is responding with true or false, right? It matches or not. But you can use another operator which is called write word operator, which is an exclusive operator. That means if it does not matches, it will throw an exception, right? So now if I want to do this, I can catch it and log it and return something else if I want to, right? So now I don't know, someone says, hey, we want to support more types, right? More types. So email and SMS, and they have other attributes, right? So I can use pattern matching. I define 2 new defines, let's say. And I'm now using the case in pattern matching, the third way to use pattern matching if you really need this, right? So what is happening here? This is matching on the structure, right? So I say if its type is push, then I want to take the title, the body, and the push time. If the type is email, I want to take the subject, the sender, and some other stuff. And if the type is SMS, I want to do message, phone number, and so on, right? This is casing. So why use it? Or some examples. One is check the type of a variable, but I want to say a warning here. Ruby is a dynamically typed programming language. I take this chance to say Ruby has types. When people are saying we want types, we have types in Ruby. That's not the discussion, right? It's dynamically typed. And the second thing here is that if you're doing explicit type checking, be aware that you're fighting Ruby flexibility, because Ruby is OP, dynamically typed. We care more about the method or does this object respond to this name, and less about is this this type of object or it has this name. But you can do it. Maybe you find yourself writing this type of code, right? Doing something if it's a string or array or symbol, right? And you can use pattern matching. If you look a bit at this, looks almost like a type checking there, right? It's very string. That's beautiful, a beautiful line, I will say, right? Of course, remember this is an exclusive, so it does not matches. It throws error. You can use it like this if you don't want to throw an error it in, right? Unless in string. This is simple, you can, right? And you can do more. You can say, okay, I want to check just some parts of the hash structure. So let's say I'm reading some social media stuff and I'm only caring about hashtags here. So I care that it has inside the keyword name hashtag. So this will work, but these two will not match, right? Because they don't have the keyword hashtag. But it will not throw an error. It will just silently go over, right? And you can write something like this that can look like this if you want, right? Case value, its symbol, then do something. If it's array, do something else, right? You can also put it endless here, right? I remove the end if you really want to. I'm not saying, but okay. But now what's more interesting, you can use it for error handling and validation. So that was very simple to say, this is array or string or something. You can do it with some other methods, right? You don't need pattern matching for that. But let's say you want to say, I want to do something if there is a hash with name that is string and age that is an integer. And if it's not, then it's invalid. And you can do this, right? Here. You want to match that. Or you can even match more complex structures, right? You can destruct more complex structures with this, right? And this is pretty code that I wrote. Not exactly this one. All of these are some kind of anonymized in a way, so not exactly the code, but similar, right? So we are ingesting some kind of response, and sometimes we want the response comes with object customer or object invoice Stripe-like things, and I want to instantiate some object out of them, and you can do this with it. And here's a more complex in a bit example where I say the following. You can match against your own custom object. You saw they're matching against hash, right? Hash shape. But you can match against your own custom object. So let's say I'm in Rails. I have some active record stuff structure here. Maybe not the best for authorization, but let's say. If I add this method that is destruct keys, and it has a parameter keys, but because I wanted simply, I'm not doing anything with that, but you can do, right? And I say, okay, when you represent user as a hash, represent it like this. And when you represent admin, add something extra because it's an admin, right? Then I can do something like this. I can display a message to the person that is logged in by matching against that structure. So if it's an admin, if it's an admin with a role owner, do something. If it has permission, do something else. If it's a user with a role member, do something. If it's a team lead, do something else, right? And again, a simple thing. Pattern matching supports in something if, so you can do more. But I needed to contain a bit myself, so I will finish very, very quickly. So what now? What now is choose something that you want to adopt, let's say, right? Read your code base and find some places that you can use it. Don't invent them, right? Write a proposal about it and debate with care and cooperation, right? So here is me. I work for Cookpad at some point, and I did a PR to change Rubocop settings. Rubocop supports writing this code probably in all the ways that you want because it has a lot of settings, right? So it's not, if you think about Rubocop, it's not something that it restricts you. You have to configure it. And here I'm changing the configuration, and this is not the pitch. This is the actual pitch for this. I explain examples, why to use it, how, what does it bring, and so on and so forth, right? So write good pitches. And that's it for me. If you like, you can subscribe to my newsletter shortruby.com. If you liked what you saw, I'm writing some kind of email courses here. They are not ready, but they're close to ready. You can go to learn.shortruby.com and put your email there. I will send you when they are ready. More about this. I just pick and choose some details, but I have more about modern Ruby. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm co-organizing Friendly RB, which will be in September. Go to the website if you want to participate. Friendly RB, we have some beautiful already speakers there, but there will be more because the call for presentation is not yet finished. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. I think I took a bit of the...
Yeah. Mind blown.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Questions?
Yes.
The usual suspects.
That's why I sit here, to intimidate the speakers.
Super.
My personal dislike for many of the features, just because every time a new feature is introduced, we have to change the parser and write a lot of new code in Rubocop for all of those options that you mentioned. I'm wondering, what's your take on one thing? Most of those features, at least from my perspective, are superficial. They're not game-changing. Okay, the code became more brief, more concise, debatably more readable or less readable, but does it really help us secure a future for Ruby for the next 30 years?
Yeah, very good question. So I cannot say which one of them is the best one, right? it might be that the current ones, maybe that's the part of the question, right? Maybe the current ones are not fit, right? But what I'm saying is that in order to find out something that is useful, we have to go through experimentation, right? We have to experiment with them and say, okay, I try to use endless method, let's say, right, in my code, and in somehow after using it for a while, I discover it's not working, right? So we have to provide that feedback, right? Or say, I need to support setters, even if it looks weird, because I found it useful in this context, right? So some of them are more compression than logic changing. So it's like, I want this to express it in a smaller, I don't know, way. Some of them, I think, for example, I'm more enthusiastic about pattern matching in some cases than about data. The data one and the pattern matching, I see data being a bit on the foundation to adopt. Maybe if we want more functional things, because it's immutable, and maybe go to making immutable the full structure of a hash or so on. I'm not saying this is happening, but I'm saying maybe it's on the road toward that if we like the immutability part, right? So I cannot say these are exactly changing, but I can see that if we're experimenting them and give enough feedback, because I read for all of them the discussion on the Ruby issue tracker, right? And always two things here. One, I really like how Mats is approaching this. You saw this launching in the last years, but if you look, some of them are debated for 10 years or 7 years. This was not accepted easily, right? And Mats is always asking what's the usefulness of this, and you have to pitch in to express your pro or cons, or put some edge cases that might not be useful or might be useful, right? In order to convince. So I think we should use it and provide feedback, and maybe this will bring us to a more, a period more like Precambrian period of experimentation, right? That's my take.
Great answer. Thank you. Who's next?
Thank you.